What's going on, y'all? I got another one for you. This is going to be a little bit more, I won't say personal, but just coming off the cuff. It's not going to be much of a visual video. This is more audio. But like I said before in the previous video, I'm a caveman. I don't really know too much about editing. I know I can learn and all that. I get all that, but I just understand like the main purpose of these are mostly for the audio and not so much for the visual. That's why I don't put too much effort or emphasis on that part. So bear with me with this one. This is mostly, the words matter way more than the actual things you see on screen, even though a lot of people do need that visual stimulation. So I'll figure something out on that front. But this one's going to be something that's been kind of on my mind, I feel like honestly for most of my life, but it's definitely been weighing on me a lot more now since it's a little bit more relevant. But just how everyone's just stuck in fear nowadays. I know people have always had a little bit of cowardice in them. It's that's part of being human. That's part of being an animal. Gotta have some fear. And keeps you alive, keeps you safe. But nowadays, man, I just feel like people's fears and cowardice is just at an all-time high, where they're just allowing so many things just to slide and go unnoticed or unchanged just because they're fearful of what they might lose, or fearful of what might not happen to them, even though at the end of the day everything that we do is bigger than ourselves. You can't really just care about your possessions or your things or your ego or your pride. You gotta really do things that's bigger than you. But so many people would rather die a coward or they'd rather live to be a coward than die a hero, or just die being a decent person. Because those are the people who get remembered, honestly, overall. The people who have the courage to do what other people don't or won't. It's not even doing something that's good or doing something that's bad. It's just doing something, putting effort out there, putting actions out there. That's courageous. And most people just don't want to do that. Or if they do that, it's very, very selfish. For very selfish reasons. And sure, you will be remembered for that, but infamy is better than being forgotten. So there's definitely some respect on that front of being, courageous enough to do something, even if it is for very selfish reasons. Because at the end of the day, we all do things for selfish reasons. It's just how selfless do you want to be with those selfish reasons? The things that I do in life, sure, they benefit me the most, but I understand that I have to do things that benefit other people as well. That just gives you the most reward. Being kind to other people is just a rewarding thing because you're being ultimately kind to yourself, and that kindness just radiates off of you. It has this kind of aura around you, where you just get everything you ever want in life just handed to you. It just kind of comes at your feet, all because you just were being selfless while being selfish. And everyone else who does it the other way around, where you're being selfish and then you're kind of adding in some selfless acts. You kind of have to work a little bit harder to get those things that you want versus people who just get it automatically. And I'm one of those people who just have always just gotten whatever I needed, pretty much just handed to me. Or I just didn't have to work for it. It just kind of gravitated towards me. And I just understand that from my point of view. I know from my perspective, it's hard for other people to really get it, because that isn't their life. That isn't their story. They gotta have to work a little bit harder. They actually have to work twice as hard to get the things that I get. Sometimes even more than that. So I definitely understand where the cowardice comes from. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to question anybody's intelligence. We're all doing what's best for ourselves at the end of the day. But I also know with how our brains are wired and what's going on in society, a lot of us are being sold a lie about what life's all about and what the bigger picture is. You know, a lot of people put so much value on material things. People talk about people being materialistic, but it's just being possessive is honestly what it is. So many people are possessive of their possessive of the little bit of power that they have, thinking that that's the only power that they'll ever achieve, or that's the biggest accomplishment they'll ever have. And sure, technically, if you stay in that mind space and you keep that perspective, sure, technically you are right. That is the most power you'll ever wield, and that is the biggest achievement you'll ever have. But if you take the same person with the same body, same mind, same parents or whatever, or put them in a different location, that same person could achieve a lot more while doing a lot less. We all have doppelgangers out here. I think I read a study that says we each have like 7 people who are very similar to us genetically, right? Or you're pretty much, you have like multiple twins all over the world. And when knowing that, if you ever met that person and that person has achieved everything that you ever wanted, but they have the same, body as you, essentially saying, think the same way as you, but they're just in a different environment with different parents who did different things. All of a sudden, that changes your whole perspective. You're like, damn, if this would have happened, or this would have happened, or this would have happened, I would have been almost a completely different person. I mean, obviously, you're going to be very similar to that person, but you're each going to have different outcomes. And I always remember that. I never really looked at it from a doppelganger perspective, but I've always remembered that no matter what, my potential is always going to really determine where I'm going to go at the end of the day. Not so much, what other people around me say or do. That's just distractions to keep me off my path. But so many people they give into it, and that's kind of what's wrong, especially here in America. So many people just give in to what people say and what they believe. So many people are just scared. That's why religion is such a powerful thing to control people. I don't have any beef with anybody who follows a God, but that is the ultimate form of control. If you don't trust in yourself and trust in your fellow man, then what do you ultimately believe in? That belief in a God, that belief in a higher power is noble in a way, but at the same time, it's just a shackle. It's just to chain you down, stifles your true potential. That's why so many people who are higher ups in the religious spaces, they're all pretty much corrupt. They're all just as flawed as every other human, but they feel like they've been anointed to something bigger than everybody else. And it's like, nah, you're just kind of lying to yourself. Maybe because you've been lied to your whole entire life. I don't know, but I don't really buy this whole, chosen God's favorite type deal from like a biblical religious space. I mean, obviously, people are going to be born with more favorable genetics from person to person, and you're definitely going to be chosen in that space. But thinking that God would do that, or a God would do that, is a type of cruelty that I wouldn't, pray to that person who would give, will purposely give people more favor than others, and then expect everyone just to kind of get along and try to cooperate and build community together when someone's out here picking favorites. You know what I'm saying? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. So it's just, it's another way just to avoid ourselves and avoid the truth. It's just to kind of lie to ourselves, and that's another sign of cowardice. There's so many people are just very, very cowardly moving through the world, and I don't say that lightly, like to look down on those people or to be angry, even though I know I have a lot of anger towards these people because they're the reason why our societies are the way that they are. Why the prices are the way that they are, that living situations are the way that they are, relationships are the way that they are, jobs are the way that they are. It's because of cowardice. Truthfully, that's the biggest piece of the pie. I would say. So many people just don't have the courage to really think bigger than themselves. You know, I'm gonna make a video sometime tomorrow about like not participating in this. And that takes courage though. Not participating in what's going on. And that means something different from each person, from person to person. But when you participate in this, you're basically accepting this for what it is. You're giving consent to what's going on. And then when you want to complain about it, you don't really have a leg to stand on because your signature is right there. You co-signed this entire time, and you barely gave any resistance. You were just smiling along, nodding along the entire time. And then when things get tough, you want to start complaining. It's like, that's not how this works. You know what I'm saying? There's no reason to complain with something that you were complicit to. And that's just kind of the world we live in, where the vast majority of people, they've created this situation that they're complaining about. And they want to be mad at someone else, but the first person you always need to be mad at is yourself. And then spread it outward. You gotta go inward before you go outward. You gotta help yourself before you help others. You gotta blame yourself before you blame others. I've always, at least subconsciously, known that, and I've done that. I've done a lot of blaming myself first before I started blaming others, which is the reason why I'm getting so many blessings today. It's because I've finally, cracked the code for myself to start blaming other people and stop blaming myself for everything, because I can't be responsible for everything that happens to me. That's not how things work. You know what I'm saying? It takes two to tango, as they say. So once I stopped doing that and really start being angry at other people, I started getting better results. It wasn't the results I was looking for, and I obviously was kind of shooting from the hip at first, getting angry at people. But overall, long term, it's going to be beneficial for me, for everybody who believes in me, because that anger isn't always made for you, but you do need to point that at yourself first. That's a sign of courage, is to blame yourself and to really, really be hard on yourself, but just don't overdo it, don't overextend it, to where all of a sudden now you feel like you're a problem, you're an issue, and then you feel like you don't have a place here, and you start to have all these intrusive thoughts. It's like, no, you're kind of overdoing it, overextending those thoughts. At a certain point, you got to be like, hey, yeah, you aren't infallible, or there are things that you could do to get better results in the world, but it's not, you're not the only one here. You're not the main character. You're the main character. You can do whatever you want, but you're not the main character. We're all part of this together. So once you realize that, you got to realize that, hey, I'm not the only problem or I'm not the only part of this problem. I'm not the only part of the solution either. There's other actors involved that might even have more responsibility than I have. But at the end of the day, I still got to start inward before I move outward. And so many people want to do it the other way around. They want to start outward before they go inward. And then when everything that they got going on falls apart, what's the first thing they do? Start blaming others. Or they blame themselves, right? And even though others that they're blaming might have some culpability, they might have some truth to that. But at the end of the day, if they start blaming themselves a little bit more, then they'll say that, wait, hold up, there's actually things I could have done in that situation to keep this from happening. But that takes courage. And that's what's missing in this world right now is courage. A lot of what's going on in this world is because of people's lack of courage that they could have exhibited years and years and years ago. And now it's coming. Chickens always come home to roost, as they say. So that's pretty much what's going on. And that's been kind of, been on my mind for a while now, is how this people's lack of courage is causing so much chaos in this world. Which is why so many people don't want to start families, start relationships, have kids, build for the future. Because why would people want to build a future when they know there's so many people who are just going to try to destroy it because they're scared, But the reason why I make these, the reason why I'm doing these is because I know there's people out there, might not be a lot of us, but there's people out there who are still trying to build, because that's all we can do at the end of the day. We can't stop, because you know better. Once you do that inward work, that this is how you get past it, this is how you get through it, this is how you evolve and grow. Is by going against the grain and be that resistance against it, right? It's not going to be a lot of people at this hero table, but there's always a seat. You just got to be willing to take it, to walk up there and be like, hey, this is where I belong. This is where I need to be. Because, I will rather, die a 40-year-old hero than live to be an 80-year-old coward that won't be remembered. Because heroes are always remembered. Legends live forever. There's nothing you can do about it, And they're born too. You can't even make those people either, which is also another unfortunate thing. But so many people have that in them, and they just, because they're just so hyper fixating on what they don't have, they don't see what they have within themselves and how they can be heroes themselves and be remembered. At least for things that they want to be remembered for, and not for things that they want people to forget or not remember. So it's frustrating in an extent, but at the same time, that's life. That's where we're at right now. That's where this cycle is. We got to get past it. We got to move forward. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I have been doing my whole life. Is breaking these curses that everybody has about finding that inner courage within yourself to do what's right, or do what's according to nature. Stripping down your ego, getting rid of all that pride, and doing things that are bigger than yourself. Because that's what life's all about, is doing things bigger than you, not just for yourself. That's why humans are the top of the food chain, is because of that courage we have to do things bigger than ourselves, in accordance to nature at the same time. That's what life's all about, is finding that courage to do the things you're too afraid to do, to look death in the eye, don't blink, jump head first into the void and don't even hesitate. So many people are just scared to death. And I forgot what I read about, something about, it was, I would have read or watched something about, courageous people or chosen people, or a certain type of person doesn't fear death because they know it's inevitable. right? Every day is a blessing. So why are you afraid of it when you know it's going to be coming? So what's there truly to be afraid of death? It happens every single day, you know. I think the people who are scared of it the most are the people who never fully experienced it, never really came close to it. I have at a very young age saw what death was because that's how people feel about me. That's how they felt about themselves. They knew what I was destined for, and instead of allowing me to reach that, they had to at least test me first. And that's what they were put on this earth to do, and they all paid for it. Every single person in my life who was ever testing me in that way, I paid for it. In the long term and in the short term, maybe not so much in the short term, but in the long term, they've always paid for it, and they will continue to pay for it. But that's not all what they're put on this earth to do. They can definitely make changes and sacrifices to better themselves and to maybe get out of that shadow. But, look at George Floyd. That dude had a huge criminal history, and he wasn't really doing a whole lot to better himself for the most of his life. But, he started to turn around a little bit later on. He still had his issues, but he was trying to get past it. And then one cop decided to be like, you know what, I'm going to get rid of this dude. And now, no matter what happens, if he gets pardoned or whatever, he's always going to live in that man's shadow. All because he didn't remind himself that this is bigger than him. And now he turned that dude into a martyr. He turned him into a hero. All because he couldn't get past his own ego, his own pride. Couldn't get past his fear. And that's what it does. That was nothing but fear. What he did, and the people who defend him is this fear. Bunch of cowards. And now you're stuck behind this man's shadow for the rest of your life, and nothing you can do about it. Same thing with Zimmerman, with Trayvon Martin. He couldn't get past his own fear, so now he's gonna die a coward. All these dudes are gonna die cowards because they couldn't get past their own fear. And that's what happens. And these dudes are going to be remembered forever. Trayvon and George Floyd and all of them. They're just going to be remembered because they were killed by cowards. And that's what happens. No one wants to go out. But if you're going to go out, at least go out that way. That's the way I see it, at least. So many beautiful things that came from that. Obviously, no one wanted that to happen. That's life. If I'm going out like that. That's the way I see it. There's no other reason to get up in the morning. You're just gonna just go out here and just die, and no one's gonna remember you. The world is just gonna keep spinning, and you're just gonna be a speck. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, we all get up to make the biggest impact in our lives and in on the planet as humanly possible. And when you're constantly being a sheep and just going with what everybody else does, and not really try to stand out, but try to fit in. Kind of what do you expect when you're constantly doing what everybody else does and constantly doing what you're told and just not living a full human experience? What exactly do you expect at that point? Can't be mad at anybody but yourself, but that's what so many people's anger is. Truthfully, is at themselves. They're not mad at him or her. They're mad at themselves for allowing themselves to go their whole entire lives without facing their fears, without facing themselves, looking themselves in the mirror. Because at the end of the day, we all have the potential to be heroes. We're all not going to be the same size heroes, or we're all not going to have the same amount of impact, but we all have the ability to have a major impact on this world that is bigger than us, that you're going to be remembered for something a little bit more positive, that you're going to be held in high regard. We all have that in us innately. And it's just depending on where you are and the culture you're surrounded by, that's going to heavily dictate whether or not you get to be able to tap into that or not. At the end of the day, there's going to be people who win more and people who lose more. But at the end of the day, at the same time, you still have a chance to be something greater than the sum of yourself, something bigger than what you ever could have imagined, that no one's shadow can ever overcast your future. But that's, like I said, that all comes with courage, and that is at an all-time low. So I'm definitely going to continue to lead and show people that you need to be courageous in this world moving forward. That's the only thing that's worth doing. That's the only thing that's actually really, really moves the needle any which way, is by showing courage. Not in a good way or a bad way, but just really show courage and be unapologetic about it. Don't be a coward about the courage, Don't do something and then go back on it or lie about it, or pretend like it didn't happen. That's not courage. That's not courage at all. Be unapologetic about everything you do, because at the end of the day, everything is predetermined. So no point of lying about it. No point of hiding. Just be who you are. That's the most courageous thing you can ever do, is be who you are and be unapologetic about it. Which I'm glad the younger generations are doing it. They're definitely showing us how it's done. They pretty much learned it from us. But still, I'm glad that they're actually taking the initiative and being very courageous about who they are at a very young age. And just going out there and doing what they want to do, because that is very needed. We need to see people at a very young age doing what they want to do, not waiting until retirement or waiting until they're damn near dead to do it. They're doing it as soon as possible. That's what life's all about. Is doing what you need to do as soon as possible, and not waiting to be told to do it. You know what I'm saying? So that's pretty much it for this session. Probably gonna have a few more of these, because I know that I always have these kind of rants, these kind of thought processes in my head, but I always feel like I gotta set up a time and place and be more proper about it. But at the end of the day, I got so many of these. I can just keep pumping these out, because I know, like, at the end of the day, I keep saying that over and over again. My autism is showing. I know that these have value somewhat, so I appreciate the people who listen to these and give me feedback and all that. But just remember, it is, life's all about being courageous and being unapologetic about who you are. You know what I'm saying? And facing the consequences of being who you are, and facing them. Don't run from them, because that's only going to make it worse. Y'all take it easy.